Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm very pleased to rise here today to speak on the issue that touches, perhaps paradoxically, one of Canada's most important, yet too often overlooked relationships, our relationship with Indigenous peoples. Like many members in this House, the riding I represent, the Mohawks of Bay of Quinte. And like many members, I can candidly say, when I was first elected to represent the area we share with Tyendinaga, I did not truly understand as much as I should have about the community. I lacked an understanding of their history, their culture, and their heritage. I didn't fully appreciate the role Joseph Brant played during the American Revolution, the alliance he and his people forged with the British, or the promises made to the Mohawk people in recognition of their fierce and loyal support. I didn't know the full story of their migration after the war, the lands they lost, or how Brant led his people to what would become their home in Canada, and for one group in particular, to the shores of the Bay of Quinte. Through talking, engaging, and most importantly, listening, I like to think that some of my earlier misunderstandings have begun to fall away. Through many conversations and incredibly patient and strong local Indigenous leaders, advocates, and community members, including colleagues in this very House, I have begun to learn more about the rich and diverse history of Indigenous peoples in Canada. Every year, I look forward to the celebration of the Mohawk Landing in Tyendinaga, and I would like to take this opportunity to sincerely thank Chief Don Miracle, the Council, and the people of Tyendinaga for their kindness, their guidance, and their patience. It is an ongoing learning journey, but one in which I hope to continue to make meaningful progress. There is one more misconception that I, especially as a federal legislator, must set aside when it comes to understanding Indigenous communities, their relationship with Canada and with the Crown. The most effective way to beginning to doing that is by listening. Listening to the concerns of the Council, the Chief, local business owners, builders, educators, and anyone else who wishes to have their voice heard. And Madam Speaker, of course, listening is a very important skill when engaging with any group, whether it business leaders, foreign dignitaries, or members of this chamber. But the relationship between Canada and Indigenous communities are too often steeped in sadness, violence, betrayal, deception, and neglect. They are numerous, and most importantly, they are each distinct. Too often, we speak of the Indigenous community as though it were a single, uniform entity. It is not. There are Indigenous communities, each with their own histories, governance structures, cultures, and needs. And even the word communities fail to truly capture the full diversity and complexity that exists. This misconception is, if not the core, then certainly a major contributor to the veil that has obscured the understanding of far too many policymakers and decision-makers here in Ottawa. And that misunderstanding, unfortunately, extends to this very place. The simple truth is that Ottawa, and indeed Canada, has too frequently been unable, or perhaps unwilling, since its inception, to treat every First Nation, Métis, and Inuit community with the individual respect, understanding, and reverence they deserve. My concern is that the creation of yet another centralized office in Ottawa risks adding only another layer of bureaucratic indifference, when what we require is streamlined, responsive process capable of negotiating, settling, and addressing historical wrongs with the attention each community merits. Non-Aboriginal Canadians hear about the problems faced by Aboriginal communities, but have almost no idea how these problems developed. There was little understanding of how the federal government contributed to that reality through residential schools and the policies and laws in place during their existence. That is a quote from Honoring the Truth, Reconciling for the Future, summary of the final report of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. And while it speaks specifically to the horror of residential schools, that same issue can be applied to far too many interactions between the state and Aboriginal communities at a larger scale. And that is what we as parliamentarians need to do. It is what we need to do better at. The reason this office has garnered some support from stakeholders is because they feel it is needed because government's not doing their due diligence in listening, engaging, learning, and advocating for the treaty rights of First Nations. The only thing that C-10 will do is create another office that will release reports that will be ignored, reiterating what we already know is happening, that the government is not doing its job. What is worse, Madam Speaker, is it may remove the onus from far too many parliamentarians to engage and listen to Indigenous communities regarding treaty rights because I'll just wait for the report and let the government deal with it, especially among parliamentarians that do not share their borders with an Indigenous community. There is another glaring issue at hand here. The government has an aversion to properly fund these offices and allowing them to maintain independence if they don't toe the line. Our procurement ombudsman doesn't have enough money to do their job. They openly stated that. They are firing the interim parliamentary budget officer because he spoke out against the government. In fact, the advertisement for his replacement is already being published in the Canadian Gazette. Madam Speaker, I support treaty rights. I support treaty rights because I respect the rule of law and I respect the courts. To me, this is a fundamental underpinning of being a Tory. In many ways, there are the same reasons that convinced Joseph Brant and the Mohawk to ally with the British all those many years ago. I want to be part of not a government, but a house, of a legislature, of a nation that removes bureaucratic barriers to reconciliation. Not what I fear is putting them up. Ultimately, when the state is involved, action is only limited by will. To put on my partisan hat for just a moment, I want to highlight some of the actions the Harper government took when, and I stress when, political will was shown. In 2013, when the Conservative government implemented a change that accelerated and improved the process for resolving specific claims, which itself was an extension of the 2007 Specific Claims Action Plan. Following that, in 2008, through legislation developed in tandem with the Assembly of First Nations, was the Specific Claim Tribunal. They also achieved a number of modern treaties, including with the Chilicho, Daliné, Mulinuth, and Sawasin. This was done without the addition of a commissioner for modern treaty implementation. Was it enough? No, but it was done. I do not believe I will be supporting this legislation because I believe it signals a silent abandonment of what we should be doing more in this House, of bringing that too-ignored relationship between Canada and First Nations into this place, of properly funding departments and agencies and removing the barriers to settlement so that not just Indigenous Canadians, but non-Indigenous Canadians can move on with their lives together. Right now, in the area that I represent, there is a settlement ongoing after years of negotiations. Yet, the government has not been forthcoming with either the Mohawk Bay of Quinte nor the town of Deseronto about what the final steps will mean for each of them. This is unacceptable for what is supposed to be one of the most straightforward treaties in the country. I do sincerely hope the ministers will work with and importantly communicate with both communities as this long-standing process moves towards a conclusion. And above all, Madam Speaker, most importantly, listen. Because if people in this House, if we never listen, we will never learn. And our ignorance would then never drift away. Thank you.
Yeah, questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. And again, to pick up on the idea of listening. And I want to point out that it is a very serious issue in which the leader of the Conservative Party has made it very clear in terms of his how he would envision things such as pipelines, where he believes that there is no duty or responsibility to work with Indigenous leaders when it comes to the pipeline. And yet the Conservatives tried to give this false impression that they actually believe in reconciliation, but when it comes to the Conservative Party's political self-serving interest, they're prepared to forego Indigenous concerns. And I'm wondering if she can explain to people that would be following this debate why the leader of the Conservative Party has taken the position that he has taken on the issue of the pipeline.
Good question.
Honourable Member for Hastings, Lennox and Addington, Tyendinaga.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank my colleague across the way. We are not here today to talk about Conservatives. We are not here to talk about politics. We are not here to talk about partisan issue as though one of my colleagues earlier spoke in a question. We are here to talk about C-10. It was very clear in my speech that a large problem that we have is a failure to keep Indigenous conversations in this place, and that member's question alludes to exactly that. Oversight is not the issue. Leadership is, Madam Speaker.
Okay, questions of the Honourable Member for Parkland.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I just find it the height of hypocrisy to hear the Parliamentary Secretary and the Liberals talk about their commitment to treaties and reconciliation when they're violating the treaties this very day. In my riding of Parkland, the Parkland School Division has had to lay off 100 educational assistants and has had tens of millions of dollars in losses because this Liberal government cut off Jordan's principal funding for at-risk and vulnerable Indigenous students. And it's not just in my riding, it's across this country. The Yellowknife Catholic School Division had to lay off 200 members because of this Liberal government's cuts to Indigenous education funding. I wonder if my honourable colleague can talk about how this Liberal government is currently failing Indigenous peoples. Thank you.
Member for Hastings, Lennox and Addington, Tyendinaga.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to my colleague for the question. Jordan's principle is a conversation that has come up time and time again with trustees from my local area. The question is falling seemingly on deaf ears through this government. I've asked time and time again for some consultation, for communication, and where we're moving forward.
Honourable Member for Nunavut.
And I thank the member for her intervention. I'm just as disgusted with the Liberal Parsec as well, and agree with the hypocrisy of their so-called mandate for reconciliation, which we know is not sincere. And I wonder if the member agrees that because we do have an important role in the Auditor General that does make sure that there are audits going on with government operations, that maybe we do need the role of the Commissioner to be able to call out such hypocrisy in this House.
Honourable Member for Hastings, Lennox and Addington, Tyendinaga.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I couldn't agree more that hypocrisy is not welcome in this House, and we hear it time and time again. This is not a true step towards reconciliation. We spoke earlier about $10.6 million over 4 years, bureaucracy posing as progress. So, Madam Speaker, what the Indigenous peoples are looking for is safer housing, reliable water, and this bill has yet to do any of that. It's just another study, when there's already recommendations in place that we need to fulfill. Let's just do and implement these things. We don't need another bureaucratic prism to do that. Thank you.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, a brief question.
Madam Speaker, I'll talk about NDP hypocrisy on another day, but I can tell you one thing, that this legislation is substantial. It's something in which Indigenous leaders have been calling for, helping in terms of assisting with the drafting of it. Can the member tell the member again, the House again, how does the member reconcile being in favor of reconciliation, yet not supporting legislation of this nature?
For Hastings, Lennox and Addington, Tyendinaga, 20 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. C-10 clearly, with no doubt, will only add another voice that governments have been ignoring for years. The issue is not people raising awareness. The issue, Madam Speaker, is the government ignoring them, and that is not going to change with that of C-10.
Resuming debate, the Honourable Member